this is a new world, right? With back in person, there's faces that for the first time, some of you, I'm actually seeing your face for the first time ever, which is really interesting. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with our session. My name is Patrick Wheeler, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Digital Strategies here. And we're excited to welcome some wonderful guests to campus for a really engaging discussion, ironically in person, to talk about remote work, which the irony is not lost on me. But we do have some folks joining us through Zoom as well from the alumni. Welcome you. Just as a housekeeping note for the folks on the Zoom, you can use the chat pod to ask questions. We'll have some questions from the audience at the end of the session. Great. So today we're here to talk about the future, what we would call the future of remote work. And as the last 2 years have taught us, we have moved from a world where we were predominantly in person to urgently not in person, and now back to this world where the rules are still being written. And the future does, however, look to have a lot more remote work involved, whether it's at a hybrid level or a permanent level. We are grateful to have 3 guests who are local today, who all work remotely and have very different paths to that choice and that decision and that kind of remote status, I guess what we'll say. But I think the focus today will be a little bit less on the decision of whether or not to go remote and much more on, okay, if we're remote, how do we manage in this world? Because as the last 2 years have taught us, and as well as predating the last 2 years, trends have shown, the move is definitely in the direction of having much more of a remote workforce, much more distributed workforce as well. So hopefully this will be really entertaining and educational for everyone in the room. We will definitely have opportunities to ask questions in a little bit. We have some moderated Q&A, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well. All right, so starting off, just introducing our panelists. So Katie Lynch is a T6 teen, so a Tuck alum, currently lives in Norwich, and is a senior lead for growth marketing at Shopify. Previously had also worked post-Tuck at Wayfair in a marketing role as well. And I'll let you introduce yourself in a sec. Omer? Omer Trajman, who also is a Norwich resident and is the founder and CEO of AskFora, among other companies that he's founded in the past. He's an executive fellow with the Center for Digital Strategies and has actually built his companies prior to COVID to be distributed and remote, as opposed to having a centralized headquarters, which is really interesting. And Teresa Burlison joins us from Lyme. You're the farthest drive in today, which is amazing. Oh yeah, you're the one. Yeah, we're the ones paying income tax over in Vermont. But joins us where she is the chief counsel and chief administrative officer for Medium, the technology company. Previously was also at Dropbox and among other roles. So welcome to our panelists. Look forward to a good conversation today. I'll just kind of start off with a couple of kind of general questions for you. So I'll start with Omer first. So you've worked in some big tech hubs, we talked about this, but you've also built companies to be distributed. Can you talk a little bit about your decision there, your journey there, and sort of where you're at these days?
Yeah, so I'd say the big switch for me was the company I founded in 2014 when I was in San Francisco. Previously, I'd managed distributed teams. My co-founders worked for me on distributed teams. And so we had this idea for a company. We looked around us, 2014 in San Francisco, like we cannot raise enough money to hire enough good people to build the product we want to build. One of my co-founders was in Atlanta. 2 of us were in San Francisco. I decided at that point to move back here, and we said, we're just going to start building. Like, we're going to hire people anywhere. We'll get people together. We'll figure it out. And I spent a bunch of time doing research and learning about all the companies that were also built remote first and fully distributed.
It's just a really interesting journey.
Recording in progress.
Do I have to say that again?
No, you're good. You're good. You've got it covered. Now, Teresa, you have a very different story from your kind of journey to where you're working remote today. Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
Sure. And can you all hear me all right? I can't tell. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, so I joined Medium at the end of February of 2020. And so I was in the office in San Francisco for approximately 2 weeks before COVID hit, and we decided to go remote just for health and safety reasons. And then it was sometime in 2020, maybe 6 months into the pandemic, where we did make the decision to become fully distributed, or at the very least to support our employees if they wanted to live and move anywhere within the United States. And so once we made that decision, and I was part of that decision in my role as general counsel at the time, it just opened up my husband and I to that. We don't have children, which also helped in terms of our flexibility, but it really enabled us to just have a thought exercise of, okay, if we've been in the Bay Area for about 14, 15 years, we don't have to be here for work. What does that mean? Are there other parts of the United States we would like to live in and explore? And we had never been in New England. My husband had spent a little bit of time in graduate school in Vermont, but otherwise we had not been here. And we started looking at housing, and my boss at the time at Medium is a Tuck graduate, and I can remember telling him, I think we're going to move to Hanover. And he said, great, I will support that. And you should meet some people at the business school. And so that's ultimately how we decided to do it. We did some research of Hanover, and it seemed like a really nice community. It did have a Dartmouth University and good medical, but it was a bit of a lark. And we found a home that we really loved. And the Bay Area housing market was exploding, so we were able to sell our house. And we just thought, why not? Why not give this a try and explore the East Coast? I'm licensed to practice in New York, so it was also an opportunity to maybe spend more time in New York, where we had an office. Medium was headquartered in San Francisco, still is, but also had an office in New York. And then over time, as things have progressed and we've become increasingly distributed, we've made the decision to just sublet our offices for the cost savings, and because our employees weren't coming in. We briefly opened them up in the summer, this past summer, and we just had far too much real estate for the amount that it was being utilized.
It's a fascinating story. Katie, you have also a slightly different kind of experience. Can you talk about your kind of journey to where you are today from a remote work perspective?
Oh boy, yeah. So I was at Wayfair for 5 years after business school, and so when COVID hit, we went remote, and the intent was to always come back to the office, but that kept getting, sort of pushed out. And I'd always loved living up here, and so decided to get rid of my lease in Boston. Ended up renting a house up here, ultimately purchasing it. So I knew that long term I'd have to go back to the office. I was able to get some accommodations, but I wasn't really looking to drive to Boston at least, once every other week or something like that. That wasn't sustainable, and so. I also just had hit that 5-year mark and was thinking about making a change anyway. So it was like a good time to kind of rethink about what I was looking for. And ultimately, I tried to pick a company that was of interest, but also had a high percentage of people who were working remote. I didn't want to be the only remote person at a company that was in Boston and everyone was in there. I just think that generates some inequities that you want to avoid. And so Shopify was really appealing to me because it's fully distributed. They got rid of all their offices. Everyone's remote. It's truly global. And it was an interesting product, and the role was exciting. And so it just seemed like a no-brainer to make that move. So I did that about 5 months ago.
So you've also now onboarded into a company remotely. Can you talk a little bit about that process and maybe what you went through versus maybe even what's going on now, if that's changed at all? Yeah,
so I think there's two parts of onboarding. One is the sort of general corporate onboarding. Shopify had that dialed down. I think it was 4 or 5 days of async and in-person and small group orientation, really, get a full overview of the company's mission, how things work. All of that stuff was really good. And then I think the other side of sort of actually understanding your role and sort of how things work, that was much more reliant on working with my manager and sort of getting that understanding. And I think transparently, anywhere you go, it's kind of up to you to figure that out. But I think it was a little bit more challenging just because you just don't get to interact with people in person, have those like casual conversations, able to kind of pull someone aside and ask them a question quickly. But I think there were a lot of tools in place to help with that, including documentation and coffee chats and all of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, Teresa, you also were very new to your organization. Going through that process, can you talk a little bit about your experiences as both onboarding in and now being responsible for bringing a lot of the organization in from the outside during, this switch for your organization?
Sure. It was very hard. I mean, anytime you join a new organization, I want to say particularly tech, but I don't want to be unfair to tech. But there is, every company has their own kind of internal culture, and it can feel a little cultish, and I think that that's intentional. That is changing because now you're getting outside of the office, but there are certain rituals and jokes and mascots and terminology that you have to learn and that you have to grow accustomed to, and so there's always that adjustment and disconnect at the start. I think it was certainly compounded by us having to be forced into becoming remote due to a global pandemic. But in other ways, it also was unifying because all of a sudden, I had something in common with everyone within the company, and I was in a leadership position. And so I was able to help contribute to the decision-making, but also then contribute to our communications around that decision-making. And so that both helped kind of introduce me to the company and elevate my profile pretty immediately, but it also gave me the opportunity to meet with people and kind of have a baptism by fire, which as a general counsel you're already kind of apprehensive about, and you anticipate that to some degree, but here that really happened on a company-wide level. Interestingly, my first week there was a bomb scare, and so I had to evacuate both offices due to the bomb scare. So that was my true introduction to the company. I had started a few days before, and then the following week, we started sending people home because of COVID.
I mean, it's a really quick way to bring somebody in and make them really part of the culture or drive them away right away, right? Right.
Well, but the culture, I don't know the medium of the before times. I don't. And that has been a real adjustment for a lot of our employees because they yearn for those times, because there was a certain cohesion and collegiality that has been lost, or at least it's different. It's in a different form. And we've been through a lot as a company. It has been a year of resetting for a variety of reasons, not just COVID. And so it's deteriorated to an extent because of internal and external forces as well. But we have been through so much. And now, like a lot of companies, we are in the process of just trying to redefine who we are as a company culture, what our identity is, and how to have that sense of esprit de corps even when we are in different time zones. And now we're global. We acquired a French company in the midst of all of this, as well as 2 other companies. And so there's a lot of integration that's going on at a time when naturally you would be in a position of integrating already.
I think the point of culture is really interesting. I'd love to hear from folks on the panel, different folks on the panel. Maybe we'll jump to you, Omer, about kind of thinking about the differences in a culture that is more distributed, right? Versus, I know it's been a while since you were in person in an office, but you obviously had made that decision and are, as the founder, a huge influencer on the culture of your organizations that you've been able to found. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think about culture with your org?
Yeah, and I'll guess two examples of that. So the company prior to the one I founded, where I was managing a distributed team, looking back on it, the team very much had a distinct culture from the rest of the company, and you can probably see this happening frequently amongst field sales teams. So you look at any company that has a field sales team, the sales culture is not just different because it's a sales team and a bunch of salespeople who like getting doors slammed in their face. It's different because they're not in headquarters. They have to develop their own distributed culture the company that I started, fully distributed, we went in with that purposefully. And so we planned, and this is, the benefit of not having to do it during a global pandemic, is we planned times for people to get together. And so there was sort of these almost like family reunions where people would meet up, we'd hang out. A day or two later, you're sick of everyone and how they chew and how their food smells, and then you don't have to see them anymore for a few months, and you can go back to working well together. The surprising thing in that environment was how much of the culture actually developed online. And we were using Slack early on, and you'd get, the memes and the emojis, and there's just so much that I remember to this day about how people rewarded each other and interacted and expressed themselves digitally, and how much of the culture evolved during the periods of time that we were not together.
I think that's an interesting point. We talk about often the different parts of our personality, different parts of our kind of ourselves, and that work might be separate from home. It sounds as though there's also this degree to which that mask that you wear at work is different in a remote culture. Does that make it interesting, more fascinating when you get together in person and you realize, oh, that person's not who I thought, or have you found that it's pretty consistent?
And I'll share an anecdote that someone mentioned to me, is you actually get more of an insight into people's lives, and you can get much closer to people because they are, and if they're doing this well, they're sharing parts of their home life with you during the times and periods that they feel comfortable doing that. So you get almost more opportunities to get close to someone. Someone walks in the background and there's a story behind it, or you see some art on the wall, or they say they're working from home, so I have to run out to get my car fixed. What happened to your car, right? And then maybe they love cars and it's a special car. So you get a lot that doesn't necessarily happen when everyone's in the office and they're in the office just to work.
That makes sense. Katie, what about you? How are you thinking about culture? Again, you've worked at a couple different companies now remotely. Thinking about culture at Shopify, for example, what is that like for you? How are you thinking about, managing teams, working with orgs within the org?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest. Our team is really small and new, so I only manage 2 people right now. So in our team, I think we've built a pretty good trust relationship and a culture, but I'm excited. We're meeting up in person in Austin in a month. I think that'll be a really good opportunity. But at Wayfair, we had a really strong culture in the marketing department. It was very collegial, very social, a lot of opportunities to meet up. And I had to deal with, during COVID, I was elected the social chair. It's great. Normally you run a Christmas party in the office and some sort of team building activity that we coined Bob Fest. Bob is our CMO. And so having to plan a virtual Christmas party was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever done. We did sort of a variety show. It was interactive. It was pretty good. But I think it's really hard. I think that's the answer. And I think trying to get people in person when you can is really helpful.
Yeah, Teresa, can you talk a little bit about some of those? We talked a little bit earlier today about this, but some of the things that have changed for your organization going remote with respect to culture and questioning things that have always been done as well.
Yes. So I would say, and I actually consulted, so now, over the course of my time at Medium, I've taken on more of an operations role as well. So now I have the people team, the finance team, our comms person, and so it's not just legal. And so I told the people team that I was going to be doing this panel, and I asked for their inputs as well, particularly with respect to culture. And then last week I was in New York and I had dinner with Dropbox's chief people officer, so my former colleague there, and we talked a great deal about this because now they're virtual first. That's how they refer to them being a fully distributed company. And one of the kind of key takeaways that all of us kind of see in sharp relief now is how, to kind of your point, Omar, you do, now more than ever, you really are quite literally bringing your whole self to work. You are peering into and having others peer into your workspace and your home. And children make appearances, and animals make appearances, and UPS arrives in the middle of a key meeting. And you really, we've all, it is very important to adjust to that. And as managers and as an organization, to embrace that and be okay with that and to understand how to manage within that context. And to really start focusing on outputs and defining what success means and then holding people accountable to that. It's much less about, obviously being in the office or FaceTime or kind of the more performative things that so many of us would engage in. And it's also less about, the water cooler talk, or I still take breaks because I'm human. I need those breaks. I'll do laundry, or I'll take my dogs for a walk in the woods. It used to be that I would grab a cup of coffee with someone, or I would just shoot the shit with someone. And we knew that we were shooting the shit, but it didn't matter because we were bonding. That's legitimate. But so too now is it legitimate for you to run to a medical appointment or run to pick up your kid. And in that way it's shifted, and I think it's very important for companies to evolve and fold that in and make that acceptable and have that be part of your the norms of your organization without that being at the cost of performance, but understanding that it's important to figure that out. Just because someone is taking, it just becomes much more obvious, I think, that when someone is taking a break to work on personal things as opposed to shooting the shit. And you can argue that both are legitimate and have value in their own ways. But having said that, and to your point, Patrick, we are still, in some of our practices, we still have one foot in the before time. So now that comms, it rolls up to me, one of our biggest internal comms levers is our all hands, which historically has been scheduled every other week. And it's called FAM, Friday Afternoon Meeting. It's now not on Friday afternoons because we have a French team. It's still an hour and a half, so an hour and a half on Zoom. The legacy of it being an hour and a half is, it was at noon in San Francisco with a catered lunch, and it was a very social, kind of lovely time to kick off the weekend. It was at 3 o'clock in New York, the start of an early happy hour. Again, the signal of the weekend, and meant to be a really kind of collegial and fun, relaxing time. And that just doesn't necessarily translate to Zoom. And so we're blowing it up. And I know that you're thinking, well, my God, it's 2 years plus into this, and you're only now rethinking that. Yes, some things really do have some inertia. And I think you need to be opening to examining those. And also it's a matter of timing and organization and things like that. So we're having to rethink that. We're also trying to figure out how to get together in meaningful ways. Last week, or the week before last, I was in San Francisco because we had our first meetup where anyone still living in the Bay Area, we have quite a few of them. It's just voluntary, social in nature, but just come, we've got a rented space, let's hang out for a couple of hours. That was lovely. The idea was not to discuss work, but as my CEO, Ev Williams, who founded Twitter and now is running Medium, he was like, we're going to talk work. So there was some shop talk as well. But it was just really good to engage in person. We're going to be reprising that in New York. But figuring out how to do that, particularly on a company level, which is expensive, both in terms of dollars, but in terms of time, and I was just talking about this with Ev yesterday in my one-on-one with him. Like, should we do this? Why? What is the why? What are we going to do? What is the plan? What is the agenda? Because it can't just be a happy hour. That's too expensive and it's a waste of time, and those days are done. And because we don't have a clear and immediate answer as to the why, we're not going to put anything on calendar right now. Maybe we'll be in a different spot towards the holidays, and we can use that as a forcing function.
I mean, I think one of the things you brought up in that as well is without sacrificing performance. Right. And the question on every executive's mind right now is, does this hurt performance and productivity? We've seen study after study that shows productivity went up in the last 2 years, but there's still significant skepticism that will eventually come back down. What has your experience been with productivity, and what are your thoughts on kind of enabling performance for your team as well across this? I'll start with Omer. I'll start with you.
I had a comment on Teresa. I don't have to jump to productivity, but I had one comment on, because you just touched on it, and I heard this from another CEO that kind of transitioned into remote work, and the way she described it is Well, I would describe it as we used to have FaceTime for free, right? We just took it for granted. And she flipped that around. She said, well, now when we meet people, we have to meet with intention,
Yes.
right? And so whenever you're going to bother spending time in person, whether it's flying across the country or across the world or just going into the office, it's not free, and you should have a reason for it. And then, we reflect back on the world that we lived in where everyone was in the office all the time. How much of that time was valuable and just wasted? And we just kind of, hung out and we'd shoot the shit. And yeah, maybe there was culture building, but had we been purposeful about it, what could we have gotten?
Yeah.
I don't have to, yeah, I can chime in later.
I mean, I think you bring a good point too about over meeting, right? And I think that's one of the challenges I've seen during COVID at the start, as well as, well, we had a lot of meetings when we were in person, so we still have to bring that forward to your point, Teresa, of like, well, what do I do if I don't meet all the time? How do I spend my time? And perhaps that means we have to rethink kind of roles even, and role definitions, and sort of what you should be spending your time on. Yeah, Katie, I'll let you.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, on the meeting front, I think Teresa touched on it too, like always revisiting what you're doing, right? Even if you just did it before COVID, doesn't mean you need to keep doing it. Or even if you did it last week or a year ago, like why sort of constantly innovate and sort of reassess what you're doing. And I think on the productivity front, I'm so much more productive remote. There's so many distractions in an open workplace. Like it's wild how much time I wasted just people drive by talking to you, meetings going on next to your desk, that type of thing. But I think as an organization, you have to make it clear that you value people and you trust them, but then also have mechanisms in place to sort of evaluate performance. So at Shopify, it's called intended outcomes. You set them every 6 months. You align on it with your manager. And that's sort of your goal for the next 6 months. And you sort of, they should be aspirational, but if you're meeting those, that means you're getting stuff done, and how you get it done is sort of up to you. And I think that's sort of the way things should go versus just the sort of FaceTime and being in the office.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's one of the questions too, that following on that sounds a lot like an OKR kind of process. Are all of you using OKRs at the org?
Oh my God, I'm triggered. No. That's my answer.
Okay. Omer?
I'm working on a startup. There's exactly one objective and one key result, which is we have to prove, we raised a bunch of money in the fall. There's one thing we need to prove. And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
One thing that I do want to call out is there is this concern principally emerging from the C-suite and from the senior leadership camps around productivity and, are people really working? And still having to adjust to, oh, she's walking her dog. What the hell is she doing? Why isn't she in front of her computer? Again, I think the more senior you are, the more you worry about that, as opposed to are subjected to that. But on the other hand, there is very clear research and data emerging, and probably all of us in this room have experienced it, around burnout. We are all completely exhausted. And so it does then introduce, a very important conversation around, are you doing the right work? Are you working smartly? But also having well-being strategies within a company, because again, we're not just showing up in front of our work computer in some silo. There's a very, very stressful world and a lot of externalities that are affecting all of us right now. And you are fooling yourself if you think that you can just kind of block that and expect your employees to block that, particularly now that they're working from home and kids are back in school, but mask mandates are dropping and we're about to be on the brink of summer vacations, and it's complicated. It was very complicated to begin with, but we all had kind of our traditions and rhythms on how to deal with that. But now it's still changing, and I think it's important for companies to, make sure that they have certain benefits and perks available to employees. Like we have a company called Spring Health. I'm sure they have many competitors, but where we offer mental health services to our employees beyond just insurance. And there are coaching platforms. We use one of them to help supplement coaching that people should be getting from their managers, but don't always receive that. But really being thoughtful and mindful about the reality that people are bringing their whole selves to work, and you need to acknowledge that. And the way that you win and retain people is by integrating that into your approach.
It's really interesting. I was speaking with an alum early on in the pandemic, maybe 6 months in, and their founder of the startup that he's working at actually was really reluctant to go remote at the start of COVID for fears of productivity. And they did the 180 within a couple months and said, people are so productive and we're worried about burnout that they gave all employees every other Friday off just completely.
We did that. So last year, and then I'll stop talking. Last year, we along with a number of other companies, because we all look at each other in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is now global, and we all talk to each other. But we decided that for every month that doesn't already have a federal holiday, and this is US-centric, France, we let kind of do their own thing because they already had quite a bit of paid time off compared to us. No further comment. There's a joke in there, but you know what? They are by far one of our more productive engineering teams, and they are in it to win it. But for every month that didn't already have a federal holiday, we gave a Friday off. So every single month, you were guaranteed a long weekend. This year, what we're doing is, because we did that, and then historically, Medium has always had 2 weeks off during the holidays in December and New Year's. And this year, we all came back from the holidays, and we were so refreshed, like universally, like, holy cow, 2 weeks off. The holidays before, we had done an acquisition, so some of us came back fairly bedraggled. This time, it was truly restorative. And we decided, okay, in service of let's constantly be evaluating our practices, we decided let's not do the extra day off monthly as needed. Let's instead, if you add those up, it's 4 or 5 days. Let's, for the July 4th week, again, US-centric, but that will be Medium summer break. And so that's a dedicated week off. So we're going to try that. I am very excited.
I love it. I love it. I think that's a good recommendation for all businesses.
Yeah, but we also have unlimited PTO, so you can take time off,
Yeah.
and people do. I'm actually surprised. This is me, the grumpy executive now. I'm surprised at how much time people take off, but they still get their stuff done.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, sorry, Omer, go ahead.
I spent some time helping out a company that was transitioning during COVID to remote. Most of their growth was remote. And they actually did that switch very successfully, where they went from, what did they have before? They had like unlimited time off, and there was still flexibility there, but they went to company shutdowns.
Yes.
And it was,
Coinbase, quite famously this year, announced on their Medium blog, they're doing something similar.
so it anecdotally seems to work.
Yeah. I think secretly, there's the experiment around, will this, maybe not with us because we're not doing enough shutdowns. Coinbase is doing, I can't remember their cadence, but it's quite a lot. I think they're hoping that to kind of control, almost like a school year, when people take time off. We're not that devious. But.
We'll jump to the audience in a couple seconds. I have one more kind of more broad question that we've talked about a little bit this morning. But thinking about productivity, thinking about deep thinking and work and interruptions and technology, how are you managing? What's that like for each of you? And maybe I'll go to Katie first, but thinking about that switch when you move to remote.
Yeah, I think it's really important to manage your calendar even more effectively. So proactively blocking off time. We tend to have no meeting Wednesdays, but I still will block off, 2-3 hour chunks on those days just in case someone tries to schedule a meeting, which they inevitably will. So things like that. And then being strategic about managing meetings so that they're back to back. You don't have those weird 30-minute spots. Those are some of the bigger things that I've worked through. Oh, and just ignoring Slack. Just ignore it. Nothing's urgent. And
Turn off notifications.
I think I did actually, like on my, I don't really get notifications on my phone anymore. I don't know how, but it's great. But people will find you, and using the like remind me feature or mark on red or things like that, because that could also be distracting. You read it and then you feel like you have to respond, and the remind me later is the best thing personally.
Yeah, Omer?
Yeah, Slack's the new email. One of the things I love about starting companies is you get a little bit of quiet time to kind of think and figure out how you want to work. And so lately, my cadence has been very different, and I want to see how long I can sustain it. And the concept is also physiologically that you're more creative in the morning. And so having much slower, and this is thankful, my wife's a morning person, she handles the kids. I have a quiet morning, and I try to schedule nothing in the morning. So it's just it's time for me to think, maybe I'm working, maybe I'm thinking, maybe I'm doing yoga, but it's just like nothing happens any morning throughout the entire week. The evenings, afternoons and evenings could be packed, they could be busy. This company that I was working for was West Coast and was trying to do some work in Asia. So like nights could have gone until 9, 10, 11 p.m. That was fine because I knew I had nothing until noon the next day. So I think that that cadence, again, it's hard to transition to. It's easy with a clean slate and a new company to do. I found fantastic, and it slows down the cadence. Actually makes you more productive because you're not banging your head against the wall. Like something can kind of live in the back of your mind and you'll solve it by accident because you're just kind of thinking. And then the other thing that I'd love to do, I've seen companies in Europe start to shift to this, is 4-day work weeks, where you're putting in the longer hours anyways, and they may not be the same 4 days. It's not like everyone's Monday to Thursday, but the expectation that you're spending fewer of the days, and maybe it's a no meeting day, but you're basically like not interacting with people. You're not online. You're not expected to be productive. Maybe you are, maybe you're not.
I've seen that with sort of split schedules, companies starting to say, hey, you can work, 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, but everyone's in on Wednesday. So that's the day when we want to have these kind of joint sessions, meetings and things, that you don't have to worry about who in this meeting do we have to switch the date and that sort of thing. So it's been fascinating.
Only meeting Wednesdays.
Only meeting Wednesdays. I like that as opposed to no meeting Wednesdays. And what about you, Teresa? How thinking about like technology interruptions, deep thinking, how has that changed for you, and how do you kind of enable that in your work or with your teams?
I agree with everything that you all have said. The one thing that I would add is just from a manager's perspective, whether you're managing more junior people or not, I think there is an element of giving permission. Your team shouldn't need that permission, but I think it's very important for you to make clear, not just model, through your own behavior, but to really make clear and say as often as you need to, you own your calendar. If this is not convenient for you, you need to let me know, or you need to schedule yourself as appropriate. That's very key in my view. And otherwise, I do find it easier because I can just, I end the Zoom and I'm out. I can leave my home office. I can go in for a walk in the woods or whatever. I can do the dishes. I'm out. It helps clear my head.
And Lime's great for that with no cell service whatsoever.
Oh, I know. But we have Lime fiber.
Oh,
That's why we bought the house. Because otherwise we had an offer on a place in Norwich. Because Norwich had internet, Lime did not. I was like, how are you functioning?
Yeah, and
But the taxes
really
get you.
interesting.
Yeah.
We have EC Fiber, which is the same company. It's a really fascinating business model for those interested in high-speed internet infrastructure. I'd check them out. All right, for the audience, what questions do we have? Dan, do you want to take it off? So we have a little bit of help too from Dan Ferran. For those who don't know Dan, it's D22. He's one of our center fellows, and he's actually researching, doing some research with the center on this topic. So a great hand and help and participant in this event today.
Yeah, so Brooke in the chat had earlier asked, and I think this might be a good time to lead off with this. How do you balance people opening up and bringing their whole selves to work with good boundaries, or not signing the team up for too much sharing or expectations to be friends outside of work? And I'm going to throw one more twist on it, which is the nature of equity, particularly for more junior employees who might not be able to afford a nice home office where they feel comfortable turning their cameras on.
Yeah, it's a really good question about both boundaries and bringing yourself, but not oversharing, as well as balancing the equities of junior, senior, and financial inequities as well.
In terms of not being friends out of the office or not being friends?
The question was like that expectation to be friends beyond the office. I would interpret that as a little bit of like work cultures that talk about being a family, which I would roll my eyes at.
Yes, totally. I think that's changing. But one of the things that we didn't talk about is like who struggles in these more fully distributed environments. And in my experience, I don't know about the others, but it is single individuals, maybe stuck in a very small apartment that's not that great, or they have a lot of roommates. And that can be really hard. And the office was, by design, their social network. I mean, a lot of us, we also have to acknowledge, these offices that we built and designed, and Dropbox was spectacular in this way. It had your gym, it had your cafeteria, it did your laundry. I mean, it was the hub of your life. Some of them have daycares on site. And then, this is a pretty seismic change that's happening. And some of us can afford to live in Lyme and buy a bunch of acres and adopt a bunch of dogs, but many of us can't, or people don't want to. So I think that is, I don't know that people necessarily are feeling the pressure to start socializing outside the office. I do think that maybe there's a struggle around people who that was their social outlet and having to readjust. I don't know what you all have seen.
I wrote a blog post on Medium where I
right.
blog exclusively, not regularly, on this topic, with a bit of a pessimistic view and a call to action, which is that companies, I think, did see this gap in people's lives as they emerged from school, and said, we can own their entire life.
Yes.
Right? If we fill all these gaps with these perks, which we could just pay them more and they could do it wherever, they could buy it on their own, they will be more loyal. Like we'll lure them in with these sort of artificial handcuffs. And I think that, broadly speaking, future of work and propelled to some extent because of remote work, where you can't do that anymore. I think companies are forced, and employees are forcing them to have a cleaner dividing line, to make work more transactional. And your Zoom example is a great example, I think, of transactional. Like, I'm on for the meeting and I'm clocking off. Like, I'm not hanging out to solve that other problem that someone thought of and came to the meeting but didn't bring up, but let's extend that, right? Meeting's done and I'm off. So I think, but not everyone has the social infrastructure yet. So there's going to be this really painful 5-10 year transition period.
It gets to that point, in fairness, also, you're both very senior, right? And so putting that boundary in place is something that you own a little bit more than someone who's relatively new. Do you see that being a struggle in for example, for Teresa, like in your org or Katie, where you are, where younger employees find it much harder to be able to draw those boundaries for themselves?
I think especially people who live alone, back to your comment on single, especially if they were in the city and maybe COVID conscious. And so they, not only were work was their whole life, and they worked too much anyways, but then also they weren't leaving the house. And I could see that it was pretty clear, and you had to sort of check in on people knowing that they maybe hadn't left the house in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And then I think on the other side, setting boundaries for any sort of social interaction, making it very clear that things were optional. One thing we did is, a lot of our stuff now is, if it's sort of a virtual social thing, it's during the day versus at 5 o'clock. So that way people who have kids or other commitments, or maybe just don't want to hang out after, aren't excluded. So I think that's been really helpful.
Audience, yeah, Leah.
I had a question about, at the top of the panel, you all three of you mentioned still like the value of getting together, and how, you can make day-to-day work pretty well, but still having these get-togethers, organized get-togethers, has been really valuable for you all. And I was curious if there's, as we've explored remote, if you found anything that replaces that, or if you really do feel like, yes, work remote or distributed, but there will always need to be this, because I feel like we're not giving in person that much credit today. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it doesn't need it.
It's interesting, right? I think the in-person versus remote, I would argue whether we are not necessarily advocating for one or the other, but the reality is this is going to be a part of your life as managers going forward, right? And so having the tools at your disposal, but your point's is a really good one. I don't know, but yeah, I look at this and say, you know, at the end of the day, to work effectively, it takes a great deal of trust, and those types of get-togethers can build significantly, can help reinforce trust within the org. Careful not to say build trust, because you don't build trust, you give trust, and it's revoked. But
So I think it's probably healthy to start thinking of it as it's just another tool. You can send someone a letter, you can email them, you can Slack or text, you can hop on a Zoom, you can hop on an airplane. And each of those is conducive towards maximal productivity given what you're trying to do. And each of them can be abused, and you get negative productivity if you try to turn email into a conversation. So if you're sitting face to face and someone asks you a question and you're working on something else, even if you're sitting in the same room, and we've had this experience previously at remote companies, it's actually better to send them a Slack message that they can queue up for later when they're done working on what they're doing, right? Whereas in an office, we just feel free to just tap them on the shoulder and interrupt them. So I think it's another mode of communication, and you have to use it purposefully for the things that it's good for.
great. Yeah, it looks Kevin.
Hi. My question is more about psychological safety at work as you kind of transfer to a more hybrid remote experience. So specifically, how do you all kind of think about creating psychological safety with the advent of obviously Slack? Probably, you know, those conversations that you would have maybe in passing or with two people kind of, you know, maybe happening when you forget to select one person and you email the whole company. But then also just those creative conversations that happen, people's ability to speak up and challenge things, given that obviously, you know, through text or on a, you know, without a voice, you can kind of misinterpret, you know, how that goes. Just really curious about how you approach that.
Yeah, I can take a crack at that. This is very hard. I mean, so I mentioned at the top of the program that Medium has had a year of reset, and we've had a number of challenges. One of the kind of chief among those challenges is we did have a union step forward. And that union ultimately was not recognized, but this was an attempt to have Medium be the first platform unionized. It was going to be a wall-to-wall union, meaning it wasn't just our writers or our editors, it was our engineers as well. And so everyone who is not a manager and therefore eligible to be in the union, that's who the union was attempting to organize. And as part of that, our Slack became so toxic and communications just broke down severely. In part, I think, because, and I think this fueled the unionizing efforts too, we had a lot of employees who felt as though they already were struggling to have a voice. They already were trying to bring issues, particularly with respect to DEI, to the fore, and they felt as though there wasn't being any progress, and they were intimidated to bring it forward, and they were looking for a union to help provide them with some solidarity and air cover. And so that they felt as though they didn't have the psychological safety to begin with. And so they attempted to unionize in order to afford themselves that safety, which I understand, and to some extent I do respect. But then the communications that we engaged in, maybe it was just we were so far gone, it was so toxic, and that word is overused, but it was just, people were just yelling at each other over Slack. And so it just degraded the environment, and whatever shreds of trust we had left, it just became even more degraded. And so we are in the process of trying to rebuild that. I guess we're not supposed to say build trust, but or earn that trust and cultivate that trust and cultivate those spaces. I had a one-on-one with a junior employee yesterday, and I told her we're rethinking how we do all hands, including the frequency with which we come together as a company. What do you think about that? She said, I'm in favor of that, but then what about AMAs? Or just, because she had some questions that I was able to answer very quickly, but she was only comfortable bringing them to me as her skip level, and because she thought I would answer her, which I did. And she said, well, can we just have more skip levels and just more opportunities to do this? Because I had told her, I hope you feel comfortable. If we did have an all-hands schedule this week, I hope you would have brought this forward. And she was like, or could we just do it in smaller groups? That's great feedback. And it was a good reminder that we need to continue experimenting with this in different ways because everyone has different comfort levels, particularly new employees, particularly junior employees, in the modes of communication they engage in. And speaking in a big Zoom meeting is hard. And some people want to have their cameras off. Some people want to have it on. I think it's important that you let people know if you want your camera off for whatever reason, do it. That's fine too. Sometimes you need that in order to kind of pull yourself up to say whatever it is that you want to say. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's an important one and it is hard.
I was going to say, I feel like it's gotten harder for managers, but it is a key management function, and it's the responsibility of the founder and the exec team to give managers the tools to address those kinds of issues. We at my last company, we used two very specific tools and had plenty as a growing company and a small team of kind of potential toxicity, right, and psychological issues. So we had two things that we gave our managers. One, what we called the no asshole rule, which is we don't hire assholes. It's part of the screening process. So if someone is acting in a way that you think is negative towards you or is counterproductive, it's not because they're an asshole, because they wouldn't have gotten hired. So there's something else going on. And it's your responsibility, if you notice that behavior, to help figure out what is behind it instead of latching onto it and making it worse. That led to the second tool, which is, if you've heard of the 5 whys, which is when someone says something, they often don't understand why they're saying it. And so you have to ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And you actually have to ask why, you have to ask for clarification 5 times before you get at the real understanding and the root cause. And it actually goes to, what's the value of in-person? Sometimes that happens on an email and you say, okay, let's just chat about it. And then, okay, I want to hop on a Zoom. And now you're only 3 or 4 whys in and you realize, okay, this is going to require us just getting together and spending an entire afternoon and then maybe going to dinner to really start working through, this one issue. And there's something under there that I don't understand that you may not understand. That we have to address. But the managers have to be trained with that, and that training, all the managers who went from in-person to remote didn't have that, and that's a tall order.
I think it's probably, we're about at time. It's a good place to stop. But I think one of the things that I've just reflecting about the last hour, you'll notice that very little of the discussion is about the technology enabling this. It's really about management and people and how do you manage people, right? Which is the hardest thing that we as leaders can do. And it's a good lesson for MBA students, right? That in all of my years of running the center and working in the center, we ask a lot of alums when they come back, what's hard in your job? What do you wish you spent even more time thinking about it while you're in school? And it's always managing organizations, managing teams, managing individuals. Those kinds of topics are the most challenging for pretty much every leader that I've known over my career as well. So, with that, I think it's a good place to stop. We could probably go for about 4 more hours. I don't think that's feasible for any of us at this point. This is, as our first return to in-person, it's a lot, right? So thank you very much for spending this time with us today. We do have a couple of thank yous for you as well.
Oh, this is the benefit of being live. We get presents.
It is true. Presents do really make it a lot easier in person. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And from the center and Professor Taylor, our faculty director, we just want to thank you for joining us today. We do have some more events coming up. Check the calendar in the center website. April 11th, one of your classmates, Bradley Webb, will be coming back as well. He's from Surge AI, which is a natural language processing, an AI company, to talk about their business and some other things. So look forward to seeing you at that event as well. Thanks, everybody.